I want you to listen carefully, because today we're talking about something that you will see in your workplace, in your relationships, maybe even in yourself. It's called the ego collapse. See, a narcissist walks into the room like they own the world. They puff up their chest, demand attention, and make you believe they are the strongest person in that space. But let me tell you something. They are not strong. They are fragile. A narcissist's grandiosity is not just arrogance. It is a carefully crafted illusion, a defense mechanism built over years to shield a fragile and insecure core. They construct a larger-than-life persona, portraying themselves as superior, infallible, and beyond reproach. This illusion is their armor, their way of navigating the world without ever having to face their true self. But like all illusions, it is inherently weak, constantly needing validation to sustain itself. The moment reality challenges this grandiose image, cracks begin to form, and eventually the entire facade collapses. At the heart of grandiosity lies a desperate need to be seen as extraordinary. Narcissists do not merely want success, they want to be idolized. They crave admiration, not just respect. Every achievement, every compliment, every ounce of attention they receive is like fuel that keeps their carefully constructed identity alive. But this creates a dangerous paradox. They depend entirely on external validation for their self-worth, yet they refuse to acknowledge that dependence. They convince themselves that they are naturally superior, that their greatness is self-evident, when in reality their sense of self is completely tied to the perceptions of others. Because of this, narcissists seek environments where they can dominate, where they can be the smartest, the most talented, the most powerful. They avoid situations where they might be outshined or where their weaknesses could be exposed. If they are in a workplace, they surround themselves with people who flatter them, not those who challenge them. If they are in a relationship, they manipulate their partner into believing they are irreplaceable. This is not confidence. This is control. A truly confident person does not fear competition, does not run from challenge, and does not crumble when their flaws are pointed out. The illusion of grandiosity also makes narcissists blind to self-improvement. Since they refuse to acknowledge any weaknesses, they never genuinely grow. Instead, they double down on their delusions, insisting that any failure is someone else's fault. If they lose a job, it's because their boss was incompetent. If they ruin a relationship, it's because the other person was ungrateful. If they face criticism, it's because people are jealous. This inability to take responsibility becomes their ultimate weakness. A person who cannot recognize their flaws cannot correct them, and a person who cannot correct their flaws is doomed to repeat the same mistakes. However, reality has a way of catching up. The more a narcissist relies on their illusion, the more brittle it becomes. They spend years creating an image of perfection, yet the moment they encounter a situation where their perceived superiority is challenged, where someone outperforms them, where they fail at something meaningful, where they lose the admiration they depend on, their entire identity is thrown into chaos. This is why narcissists react so violently to criticism. It is not just a simple disagreement for them, it is an existential threat. To them, being wrong means being weak, being criticized means being unworthy, and deep down, that is their greatest fear: to be ordinary, to be like everyone else, to be nothing special at all. This fear makes them incredibly sensitive, despite their outward confidence. They might appear strong, but their ego is built on quicksand. It takes only one real challenge, one undeniable failure, for their entire sense of self to start crumbling. And when this collapse begins, it is devastating. They lash out, they withdraw, they spiral into self-pity or rage. Some become consumed by bitterness, blaming the world for their downfall. Others retreat into isolation, unable to face a world that no longer sees them as superior. But the truth is, the collapse was inevitable. No one can sustain a life built on illusion forever. Eventually, the weight of reality becomes too great, and when that moment comes, the narcissist is left with nothing but the emptiness they were trying to escape all along. A narcissist's greatest fear is not failure, not rejection, not even loneliness. It is exposure. The fear of being unmasked, of having the world see them for who they truly are, haunts them more than anything else. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the carefully crafted image of superiority, lies a fragile and deeply insecure core that they spend their entire lives hiding. The narcissist does not simply want admiration, they need it to survive. It is the mask that keeps their real self buried, the barrier that protects them from their own unbearable self-doubt. But the problem with wearing a mask is that it always runs the risk of slipping, and when it does, the narcissist's carefully constructed world begins to unravel. They live in constant fear of this exposure, which is why they go to great lengths to control how others perceive them. Every interaction, every relationship, every environment they place themselves in is carefully curated to reinforce their superiority. If someone dares to question their authority, they react with either rage or manipulation. They will gaslight, twist reality, and shift blame to ensure that their facade remains intact. They cannot afford to be wrong because being wrong threatens the illusion they have built. If someone points out their flaws, instead of acknowledging and learning from them, they attack, belittle, or dismiss the critic entirely. The world must always see them as untouchable, unbreakable, and above reproach. This fear of exposure is why narcissists often struggle with close, meaningful relationships. True intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires honesty. But honesty threatens to bring their real self to light, the self they have spent years running from. They avoid deep emotional connections because to truly connect with someone means allowing them to see beyond the mask. Instead, they prefer relationships where they can maintain control, where admiration is given freely, but emotional depth is kept at a safe distance. If a partner, friend, or even a colleague begins to see through the illusion, the narcissist will either discard them or work tirelessly to manipulate them back into submission. Ironically, the harder they fight to maintain this false image, the more exhausting it becomes. They live in a state of constant vigilance, always watching, always calculating, always making sure that no one gets too close to the truth. They exaggerate their achievements, inflate their successes, and downplay or completely erase any evidence of their failures. They need to be seen as the smartest, the most talented, the most powerful, because if they are not, then what are they? Their entire self-worth is externally dependent, and that is what makes them so vulnerable. But life has a way of bringing the truth to the surface. No matter how well a narcissist hides, no matter how carefully they control their narrative, reality will always be stronger than illusion. They may be able to manipulate individuals, but they cannot manipulate life itself. There will come a moment when their lies can no longer cover their failures, when their arrogance can no longer mask their incompetence, when their charm can no longer keep people under their spell. And when that moment arrives, the narcissist crumbles. The exposure they have feared for so long becomes inescapable. The people they have controlled begin to walk away. The praise they have depended on begins to fade. The world no longer sees them as exceptional. And without that external validation, they are left with nothing. The terror of being ordinary, of being just another flawed human being, consumes them. Some retreat into bitterness, blaming the world for not recognizing their greatness. Others spiral into self-destruction, unable to function without the illusion they once relied on. But the most tragic part? The narcissist's downfall is always of their own making. Their need to appear invincible blinds them to the very weaknesses that cause their collapse. If they had been willing to face their flaws, to accept that they are not perfect, to build real strength rather than hide behind a false image, they might have found true confidence. But instead, they chose the easier path, the path of deception, of arrogance, of control. And in the end, that path leads only to loneliness, regret, and the very thing they feared most, the undeniable truth of who they really are. The narcissist's ego is like a glass castle, impressive from a distance but dangerously fragile. They project an image of supreme confidence, an air of invulnerability that makes them seem untouchable. But beneath that exterior lies a foundation built on insecurity, a self-worth that is entirely dependent on the approval and admiration of others. They do not possess the inner stability that comes from genuine self-awareness or personal growth. Instead, they construct their identity around external validation, feeding off compliments, attention, and superiority. The problem with this approach is that it leaves them vulnerable, extraordinarily vulnerable. Unlike a person who has developed true self-confidence through resilience, introspection, and personal achievement, a narcissist's confidence is an illusion. It is a performance, a show carefully maintained to convince both themselves and others that they are exceptional. But because they do not truly believe in their own worth outside of this performance, they must constantly reinforce the illusion. They seek admiration at every turn, gravitate toward people who will affirm their greatness and avoid or destroy anyone who challenges them. Their self-esteem is not a deep-rooted tree. It is a house of cards, and even the slightest gust of criticism or rejection threatens to send it all crashing down. This is why narcissists react so explosively to even the mildest forms of disapproval. A simple critique, an honest piece of feedback, or a moment of being overlooked can feel like an existential threat. While most people can accept constructive criticism and use it to grow, narcissists experience it as a direct attack on their very identity. Since they have built their entire sense of self on being superior, being wrong, or inadequate in any way is intolerable. They cannot separate their actions from their worth, so instead of acknowledging mistakes, they deny, deflect, or shift blame onto others. Their extreme sensitivity to rejection further reveals the fragility of their ego. If they are ignored, passed over for a promotion, or fail to impress someone they admire, they spiral into anger, resentment, or despair. In their mind, they are not just experiencing a moment of failure. They are facing the possibility that they are not as extraordinary as they have convinced themselves to be. And that is a truth they cannot bear. They will either rage against those who they believe have wronged them or retreat into self-pity, convincing themselves that the world does not appreciate their brilliance. This need for constant affirmation places them in a relentless cycle of dependency. They must always be chasing admiration, always seeking new sources of validation to keep their fragile self-esteem intact. If one source dries up, a relationship, a job, a social circle, they must quickly replace it with another. They cannot afford to sit with themselves in silence because silence forces them to face what they have been running from all along, the deep, unsettling truth that their confidence is hollow. The irony is that this very fragility is what makes their eventual collapse inevitable. No one can maintain a perfect image forever. Eventually, their flaws become too visible to ignore, their manipulations catch up with them, and the people who once admired them begin to see through the act. When this happens, the narcissist is left defenseless. Their entire identity was built on being admired, and without that admiration, they do not know who they are. Some will lash out, blaming everyone around them for their downfall. They will claim betrayal, injustice, and jealousy from others rather than accept responsibility for their own actions. Others will fall into despair, unable to function without the steady stream of praise they once depended on. But no matter how they react, the result is the same. They are left standing in the wreckage of the illusion they spent their lives building. The lesson here is clear. True strength does not come from the approval of others. It comes from within. A person who is genuinely confident does not need constant praise to feel valuable. They do not fear failure because they see it as a chance to learn and improve. They do not avoid criticism, but embrace it as a tool for growth. And most importantly, they do not rely on illusions to feel worthy. The narcissist's downfall is a lesson in what happens when someone builds their identity on a fragile foundation. No matter how grand the castle may appear, if it is built on insecurity, it will eventually collapse. The only true way to achieve lasting confidence is through humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to grow. Those who refuse to face their flaws will always be at the mercy of their own fragile egos, destined to crumble the moment the world stops clapping. The cycle of self-destruction that narcissists experience is not an accident. It is a pattern, one that plays out in their personal relationships, careers, and even within their own minds. At first, they seem unstoppable, radiating confidence, charm, and superiority. They build an environment where they are admired, praised, and placed on a pedestal. But admiration is fleeting, and the moment it begins to fade, their carefully constructed world starts to collapse. When this happens, the very behaviors that once brought them success, manipulation, arrogance, and control, turn against them, leading to their inevitable downfall. A narcissist does not operate from a place of genuine self-worth, but from a constant need to be seen as superior. Their entire identity is built on external validation, and as long as they can maintain the illusion of greatness, they feel secure. They surround themselves with people who reinforce this illusion, followers who praise them, friends who tolerate their behavior, and partners who submit to their control. They thrive in situations where they can dominate, where their perceived intelligence, beauty, or talent is unquestioned, but this reliance on external validation is what makes them vulnerable. Because no matter how much they try to control the world around them, they cannot control reality, and reality always catches up. As time goes on, their need for admiration becomes insatiable. The compliments that once satisfied them no longer feel like enough. They demand more attention, more respect, more proof that they are superior. They push boundaries, test relationships, and seek constant reassurance that they are as extraordinary as they believe themselves to be. But in doing so, they begin to drive people away. Friends grow tired of their self-centeredness. Colleagues resent their inability to work as a team. Romantic partners become exhausted by the emotional drain of always catering to their needs. And when the narcissist senses this shift, when they begin to feel people pulling away, their reaction is not self-reflection, but panic. Instead of adjusting their behavior, they double down. They become more controlling, more demanding, more manipulative in an attempt to regain the admiration they are losing. If charm worked before, they will turn up the charm. If intimidation kept people in line, they will become even more aggressive. They will do whatever it takes to restore their status, to silence the voices that are beginning to question them. But the more they try to control the narrative, the more obvious their desperation becomes. And the more obvious it becomes, the faster people start to see through them. This is where the true self-destruction begins. The very traits that once made them appear confident now make them look unstable. Their arrogance, once mistaken for strength, is exposed as insecurity. Their manipulations, once subtle, become transparent. Their inability to handle criticism, once excused, becomes unbearable to those around them. And as their power slips away, their behavior becomes more erratic. Some lash out, attacking those who they believe have turned against them. They spread lies, create drama, and attempt to destroy the reputations of those who no longer feed their ego. Others retreat into victimhood, claiming they have been betrayed and mistreated. They seek sympathy, hoping to regain control through guilt, but neither strategy can stop the inevitable. People have seen the truth, and they are no longer willing to play along. The final stage of self-destruction is isolation. As people walk away, the narcissist is left alone with the one person they have spent their entire lives avoiding, themselves. Without an audience, without constant affirmation, they are forced to face the emptiness that has always been there. And this is the moment they fear the most. Because without the illusion, without the external validation, they do not know who they are. They are left with the reality they have been running from, their own insecurity, their own unhealed wounds, their own lack of true identity. Some will attempt to rebuild, seeking new people to manipulate, new environments where they can regain their status. But unless they are willing to confront their own flaws, unless they are willing to truly change, the cycle will repeat itself. They will rise again, only to fall once more, trapped in a never-ending loop of self-destruction. Because the truth is, a person cannot build a life on illusion forever. Sooner or later, the weight of reality will bring it all crashing down. And when it does, the only thing left will be the ruins of what could have been if only they had chosen a path of growth instead of control, humility instead of arrogance, authenticity instead of deception. When a narcissist finally collapses, it is not just a single event. It is a gradual unraveling that builds over time, a process that begins the moment they can no longer maintain the illusion they have worked so hard to protect. For years, they have shaped their world to reinforce their grandiosity, carefully selecting relationships, environments, and opportunities that feed their need for admiration. They have lived with the belief that they are exceptional, untouchable, and beyond reproach. But reality has a way of breaking through even the strongest delusions. When the admiration fades, when their manipulations stop working, when their flaws become impossible to hide, they are left in a crisis they are entirely unprepared to handle. At first, the narcissist fights back. They refuse to accept that their influence is diminishing. They cling to the strategies that once worked, trying to charm, intimidate, or deceive their way back into control. They blame others for their failures, insisting that those around them are jealous, disloyal, or simply too foolish to recognize their brilliance. They create elaborate justifications to explain why they are no longer at the top, convincing themselves that they are victims of circumstance rather than the architects of their own downfall. But no matter how much they deny it, they cannot escape the truth. People are leaving, their power is fading, and the world is no longer responding to them the way it once did. This realization triggers a deep internal crisis. The narcissist has spent their entire life avoiding self-reflection, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding anything that forces them to question their own worth. But now, with their external validation gone, they have no choice but to face themselves. And what they see is terrifying. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the mask of confidence, is a deep emptiness, a lack of true self that they have spent years covering up with praise, achievements, and control. Without these external reinforcements, they feel lost, insignificant, and powerless. The very things they feared the most, rejection, failure, and unimportance, have now become their reality. Some narcissists respond to this collapse with rage. They lash out at those around them, attempting to regain power through intimidation. They become desperate, using manipulation, deceit, and even cruelty in an attempt to force people back into their orbit. But these tactics, once effective, now only push people further away. Others react with deep depression, withdrawing from the world and sinking into self-pity. They see themselves as tragic figures wronged by a world that never truly appreciated them. They may even isolate themselves completely, unable to cope with a reality where they are no longer admired or feared. But no matter how they respond, the core experience remains the same. They are faced with the truth of who they really are, and they have no tools to deal with it. Unlike a healthy individual who has built their confidence on real achievements, personal growth, and self-awareness, the narcissist has spent their entire life avoiding these things. They have never developed resilience because they have never allowed themselves to experience real failure. They have never built true self-worth because they have always relied on external validation to feel valuable. So when the illusion shatters, they are left with nothing, no internal strength, no real identity, no foundation to rebuild from. For some, this collapse is the beginning of a downward spiral from which they never recover. They move from relationship to relationship, job to job, social circle to social circle, trying desperately to find a new source of admiration. But because they never truly change, the cycle simply repeats itself. They may find temporary success, but eventually their own behavior catches up with them again, and the process of collapse starts all over. Others, however, are faced with a rare opportunity. An opportunity to truly change. The collapse of the narcissist, as painful as it is, can also be a turning point. If they are willing to confront their own flaws, to acknowledge their insecurities, to let go of their need for constant validation, they have a chance to rebuild, not as a false, grandiose version of themselves, but as a real, authentic person. But this is not an easy path. It requires humility, self-awareness, and a willingness to accept that they are not superior, not entitled, not beyond the struggles that every other human being faces. It requires them to step into discomfort, to let go of control, and to embrace the very vulnerability they have spent their entire lives avoiding. Few narcissists take this path, but those who do often emerge transformed. They learn that true confidence does not come from external admiration, but from within. They discover that relationships built on honesty and mutual respect are far more fulfilling than those based on power and control. And they realize that strength is not about appearing invincible, but about having the courage to acknowledge weakness and grow from it. The collapse of a narcissist is both their greatest fear and their greatest test. It is the moment where they either break completely or begin the difficult journey toward becoming something more. But one thing is certain: once the illusion falls apart, there is no going back. They can no longer escape the truth. The only question is what they will do with it. The fall of a narcissist is never sudden. It is the inevitable consequence of a life built on illusion rather than truth. For years, they construct a false reality where they are superior, invincible, and beyond reproach. They feed off admiration, manipulate those around them, and silence any voice that threatens to expose their vulnerabilities. But no illusion lasts forever. No amount of charm, deception, or control can outrun the truth. And when that truth finally catches up, the collapse is devastating. Their downfall is not the result of external forces, nor is it the work of those they have mistreated. It is the consequence of their own refusal to grow, to change, to face the reality of who they truly are. The same arrogance that once made them appear powerful turns into the very thing that isolates them. The same manipulations that once gave them control become the reason people walk away. The same fragile ego they spent a lifetime protecting becomes the weight that finally crushes them. But within every collapse lies a choice. Some narcissists will remain trapped in the cycle of destruction, rebuilding the same illusions only to watch them crumble again and again. Others will retreat into bitterness, blaming the world for their failures rather than taking responsibility for their own actions. But a rare few will see their downfall for what it truly is, not an end, but an opportunity to strip away the facade, to confront their deepest fears, and to finally build a foundation rooted in authenticity rather than deception. The lesson here is not just about narcissists, it is about all of us. True strength is not found in arrogance, but in humility. True confidence is not built on external validation, but on self-awareness. And true power does not come from control, but from the ability to learn, to grow, and to face reality with courage. Those who refuse to embrace this truth will always be at war with themselves, forever running from the collapse that waits in the shadows. But those who choose the harder path, the path of honesty, of self-reflection, of real transformation, will discover something the narcissist never could: the freedom that comes with no longer needing to pretend.